A simple woman was mocked at a millionaire CEO's wedding, but became the woman they could never break. They laughed at her, mocked her, kicked her out like trash. But just when they thought they'd won, her billionaire husband stepped in. And what happened next? It shattered their perfect little world. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It's about how the most powerful woman in the room was the one they tried to break. She was kicked out of her friend's wedding moments later. Her billionaire husband arrived. The French Riviera sparkled that afternoon, like the world itself was celebrating the union of two young elites. The Palais de Lumière, a palace of marble and gold perched high above the sea, was alive with the scent of roses, the glitter of diamonds, and the hum of $1 million dream coming true. But for Hannah Lee, the dream was about to turn into something much darker. She adjusted the soft linen dress against her frame as she stepped into the grand lobby, her heart steady, her breath calm. The dress wasn't new, it wasn't designer, but it was hers, chosen carefully with love. Pale sage, square-necked, falling just to her ankles, it moved like quiet grace around her legs. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a neat bun, held in place by a simple wooden, and she wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because once upon a time, Vivien LeBlanc had been her friend. Hannah's flats clicked softly on the polished marble as she approached the check-in table. Behind it stood Camille, a concierge so flawless she might as well have been carved from ice. Her eyes flicked up, scanning Hannah's plain appearance with a glance so sharp it could cut silk. "Service staff uses the side entrance," Camille said, already turning away. Hannah didn't flinch. "I'm a guest," she replied, her voice calm, smooth. She held out the invitation. Camille's eyes narrowed, but she took the card, flipping it as though expecting it to vanish. "Gold embossed, authentic." "One moment," Camille murmured into her headset, stepping away. As Hannah stood, a wave of guests swept past her. Women in sequins and velvet, men in tailored tuxedos, dripping in wealth. One woman paused, her lips curling. "Is that the caterer?" she asked, loud enough for the lobby to hear. Laughter bubbled up around her like poison. Elise Morrow, Vivien's bridesmaid, a social media viper. Beside her, Sophia Reyes, queen of a beauty empire, and Tara Clean, reality TV star, joined in. "What's with the thrift store vibes?" Tara sneered. "Did you wrap that in garbage?" Sophia giggled, snapping a photo. Hannah didn't move, didn't waver. "It's a gift," she said softly, eyes steady, "for the bride and groom." "Oh, honey," Elise leaned in. "This isn't a craft fair. This is high society." As the crowd gathered, drawn like moths to a flame, Camille returned, flanked by a stern wedding planner. "Mr. Lee," the planner said coldly, "your name isn't on the seating chart. I'm afraid you'll need to leave." "I was invited," Hannah said, her voice firm but still gentle. "I came for Vivien." And then she appeared. Vivien LeBlanc, in a gown of Swarovski crystals, hair in an elegant updo, tiara glittering like a queen in her castle. Her eyes found Hannah, and for a moment, just a moment, there was something like fear. And then the mask slid back into place. "Oh my God, you actually came." Her laugh echoed brutal and sharp. "Everyone, this is Hannah Lee. We went to school together. She's still living that authentic life fantasy." More laughter, cruel, vicious. "Dress? What is it, thrifted?" Tara mocked. "She's embarrassing," Vivien hissed to the planner. "Get her out." 2 guards appeared, tall, silent. "Man, you'll need to come with us. We don't want to make a scene." But a scene was already happening. As they led her through the ballroom, past tables draped in silk, past guests pointing, filming, whispering, Hannah never lowered her head. She held her gift close. She walked with the grace of someone who knew storms and had weathered worse. Who brings trash to $1 million wedding? Bet she's crashing for the free food. Get her out already. And just when the doors loomed ahead, just when humiliation threatened to engulf her, the doors flew open. A fleet of black Rolls-Royces glided to a stop outside. And from the first car stepped a man, Julian Voss. Tall, imposing, known only in whispers, the elusive billionaire behind Voss Enterprises, a titan who built an empire of luxury and power. He didn't glance at the crowd. His eyes were only for her. He crossed the floor, cutting through gasps and silence, reaching her side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, intimate. She nodded, her eyes soft. "Always, Julian." Then he turned to the crowd, to the bride, to the world watching, and said, "This is my wife, Hannah Voss, and today you tried to humiliate the wrong woman." Section 1. The woman no one saw coming. The grand ballroom of the Palais de Lumière shimmered under the weight of opulence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above like frozen constellations, casting prismatic light over guests adorned in couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. Waiters floated through the room with trays of champagne and delicacies most couldn't pronounce. This wasn't just a wedding, it was an event, a spectacle carefully crafted to display wealth, power, and perfection. But not everyone fit the script. Hannah Lee stood quietly near the entrance, her eyes scanning the crowd with a calm detachment. She wasn't overwhelmed, though everything around her screamed extravagance. She had seen this world before, from the fringes where authenticity often went unnoticed. Her simple sage dress and unadorned grace seemed almost defiant in the face of so much artifice. She didn't shimmer, she didn't shout, she simply stood. She spotted Lucas across the room, laughing with his groomsmen, his arm around Vivien's waist. He looked every bit the successful entrepreneur, the golden boy on the brink of forever. But beneath the charm, Hannah saw the boy she once knew. The boy who had sat across from her in late-night cafes, dreaming about startups and changing the world. The boy she had believed in long before the world did. She smiled faintly at the memory. She hadn't come to disrupt this day. She had come because once she mattered here. Because she had given Lucas more than just her belief. She had given him the seed money to start it all, trusting him with her savings when no one else would. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. "Elise, look," Sophia nudged, her voice dripping with amusement. "Isn't that the girl who used to hang around Lucas? What's her name? Hannah?" Elise turned, her eyes narrowing. "Oh wow, she actually came. I thought she disappeared into some yoga retreat or something." They laughed, loud and sharp, as if trying to slice through Hannah's composure. Vivien joined them, her voice as sweet as poison. "She still thinks she belongs here? That's a Dory." Hannah's spine straightened, but she didn't flinch. She walked toward the gift table, placing the small, carefully wrapped package with gentle hands. The quilt inside wasn't expensive, but it was priceless. A tapestry of memories, stitched with care, representing the journey Lucas had taken from nothing to everything. "Maybe it'll remind him where he started," she murmured. But before she could step away, a voice stopped her. "Excuse me, ma'am, may I see your invitation?" It was one of the wedding staff, polite but firm. Hannah handed it over unbothered, her eyes still on the gift. "I was invited," she said simply. The staff member nodded slowly, uncertain, and walked away to confirm. Behind her, Elise and Sophia were already whispering louder. "Probably a +1 someone forgot to cancel. He's just here for the free food." She's always been a little desperate. But Hannah didn't respond. She didn't need to. Moments later, the staff returned, flanked by security. "I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the list. You'll need to leave." It wasn't a request. Around her, the crowd began to take notice. Heads turned, cameras flashed, first from curiosity, then from amusement. "Vivien," someone called, "do you want her gone?" Vivien smiled, stepping forward with feigned innocence. "Oh, Hannah, you weren't actually supposed to come, but I'm glad you did. This really wouldn't be complete without a little blast from the past, would it?" Laughter rippled through the room. Hannah stood still, her hands at her sides, her eyes locked on Vivien's. "You've changed," Hannah said softly. Vivien's smile faltered, just for a second. And then, just as the guards reached for her arm, the ballroom doors slammed open. Julian Voss. His presence stopped everything. The laughter, the whispers, even the music. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, found Hannah in an instant. He didn't speak to anyone else. He didn't need to. "Hannah," he said, crossing the floor. "What's going on?" Before she could answer, Vivien stepped forward. "Julian, this isn't your concern. She was just leaving." Julian's eyes didn't leave Hannah. "She's not going anywhere." Vivien laughed, uneasy. "You don't even know her." "She's my wife," Julian said, his voice echoing like thunder. The room froze. And in that silence, Hannah stood not as the woman they mocked, but as the woman no one saw coming. The woman who was about to change everything. In Section 2, The Price of Arrogance. Vivien sat alone in the bridal suite, the laughter and music of what was supposed to be her perfect day now a distant bitter hum. Her reflection in the mirror looked nothing like the woman she had imagined herself to be. The gown, once shimmering with promise, now hung heavy, a reminder of everything she had lost in just a few short hours. Her tiara lay discarded on the vanity, the delicate crystals catching the light mockingly, like stars that had burned out long ago. Her phone buzzed violently on the table, screen lighting up with messages she didn't want to read. Notifications from sponsors pulling out, followers turning on her, headlines already circling like vultures. Vivien LeBlanc humiliates billionaire's wife. Influencer's wedding ends in disaster. The fall of a queen. Her empire, built on curated perfection and filtered dreams, was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She reached for the tiara, her fingers trembling, and placed it back on her head, as if somehow reclaiming that symbol of power would change the narrative. But even as she adjusted it, she knew. The damage was done. She had exposed herself, not Hannah. She had orchestrated a spectacle to elevate her own worth, only to discover she was the one being measured and found lacking. A soft knock on the door startled her. She wiped at her eyes quickly, standing tall, smoothing the fabric of her gown as if appearances still mattered. Lucas stepped in, his face etched with a coldness she had never seen before. Gone was the man who had adored her, who had knelt to propose with trembling hands. What stood before her now was a stranger. "Lucas," she began, her voice breaking. "Please, you have to believe me. I didn't know who she was. I thought she was just—" "You thought she was beneath you?" he interrupted, his voice flat. "You wanted to make her a joke, someone you could step on to feel taller." "I was scared," Vivien confessed, stepping closer. "When I saw her name on the guest list, I remembered how she used to make me feel, like I didn't belong, like no matter how hard I tried, I could never be as good as her. I didn't think she'd actually come." Lucas shook his head, disbelief darkening his features. "You didn't think, you just acted. You turned our wedding into a stage for your insecurities. Do you know what it was like to see her face as they dragged her out? She didn't cry, she didn't beg, she just stood there, letting the world mock her, and she still had more dignity than anyone in that room." "I love you," Vivien whispered, reaching for his hand. He stepped back. "You love the idea of love. You love control, Vivien, but you don't know how to cherish people. Not really." Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the velvet settee, hands clutched in her lap. "Please, don't leave me. We can fix this. I can apologize. We can spin it." Lucas's eyes were empty of hope. Some things can't be spun, some things break, and they stay broken. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You lost me today, Vivien, but more than that, you lost yourself." The door closed softly behind him, the finality of it louder than any slam. Vivien sat in silence, the weight of her choices pressing down until she could barely breathe. Outside the suite, the palace was unraveling. Guests whispered in corners, alliances shifting as quickly as the headlines. Elise was sobbing by the bar, her phone filled with angry comments from followers who had once adored her. Sophia's beauty brand had already released a statement distancing themselves from the event, and Tara had vanished, leaving behind only an empty champagne flute and a feather from her dress. Clara stood by the entrance, clipboard in hand, cool and composed. One by one she marked names off her list, ensuring that those who had participated in Hannah's humiliation would never step foot in a Voss property again. The message was clear. Disrespect would not be tolerated, no matter how pretty, rich, or famous you pretended to be. Julian and Hannah had left hours ago, the Rolls-Royce pulling away from the chaos and into the calm of the evening. They didn't need to stay and watch it fall apart. They had made their point, and now the rest would crumble under its own false weight. In the suite, Vivien peeled off the gown, each movement slow and mechanical. She let it fall to the floor, stepping over it as she moved to the window. Below, the sea stretched endlessly, dark and unforgiving. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, eyes searching the horizon for something, anything that could anchor her. But there was nothing. Just the echo of her own voice, the memory of her own laughter as she tore another woman down, not realizing that the only thing truly falling was herself. She thought about Hannah's eyes, calm and unwavering, about the gift wrapped in recycled paper, a quilt stitched with care, a symbol of a life lived with meaning. She thought about what it meant to have real worth, and how far she had drifted from it. Vivien LeBlanc, once the queen of curated dreams, now stood alone in her palace of sand, the tide of truth rushing in, washing away everything she thought she had built. And for the first time, she was truly afraid. Section 3. The Quilt and the Truth. The quilt lay folded on the seat beside Hannah as the Rolls-Royce glided smoothly along the coastal road, moonlight dancing over the sea like silver threads. Julian sat silently, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other gently clasping hers. The chaos they had left behind at the Palais de Lumière seemed like a distant storm, but its echoes still lingered in Hannah's chest. She glanced at the quilt, her fingers brushing the twine that had once held. It was meant to be a simple gift, a token of warmth, of time, of memory. Now it was a symbol of everything that had been torn open in that ballroom. Julian's voice broke the quiet, low and steady. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." She turned to him, her hazel eyes soft but tired. "I'm not. It showed me exactly who they are and who I am." His grip on her hand tightened slightly, as if anchoring her back to the present. "You were incredible in there. You didn't flinch, Hannah. You didn't let them win." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't need to. They defeated themselves." Julian slowed the car as they approached the entrance to their private estate, nestled high on the cliffs, hidden from the world they so often chose to avoid. The gates opened silently, and the car rolled up the long driveway, framed by olive trees and the scent of lavender in the cool night air. Inside the house, everything was calm. The walls, lined with art from around the world, the soft glow of lamps casting gentle shadows on the wooden floors, felt like a sanctuary. Julian poured her a glass of wine, and she sank into the deep cushions of the couch, the quilt still in her lap. He sat beside her, watching her fingers trace the stitching. "You made that for them, didn't you?" She nodded. "For Vivien and Lucas. I thought maybe it would remind them of what's real, what matters. But it wasn't enough. It never is, with people like her." Julian leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "People like her only understand power when it's shown to them, and tonight you showed them the kind they'll never possess." Hannah rested her head on his shoulder, the weight of the day settling over her. "I didn't want to humiliate her, Julian. I didn't want any of this. I wanted to believe we could still be the girls we were." He kissed the top of her head gently. "You outgrew her, love. She stayed behind in a world of appearances. You moved on to one of substance." They sat in silence, the quilt between them like a bridge to something more grounded, more meaningful than the glittering lies of the world they had left behind. But even in their peace, the outside world stirred. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. It was almost corrupted by problem. After wedding scandal, the billionaire's wife they tried to break. Hannah Voss speaks without words. Power, grace, and the fall of the influencer queen. Julian watched the news from his study, the muted screen flashing images of Vivien, Elise, Sophia, all caught in their worst moments, faces twisted in shock, anger, shame. Hannah stood in the doorway, a cup of tea in her hand, her gaze steady. "They'll move on," she said quietly. "They'll find someone else to tear down next." "Not if we change the game," Julian replied, turning to face her. "What if we use this moment, show people that real power isn't in status or money, but in integrity, in standing tall when others want you to fall. She stepped into the room, placing her hand on his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" "A foundation," he said, eyes lighting up. "In your name, for women like you, for people who've been mocked, overlooked, underestimated." Her heart stirred. It wasn't revenge. It was something more. A legacy. A way to turn pain into purpose. "I like that," she said, smiling, "but only if we call it what it is." He raised a brow. "And what's that?" "The Quilt Foundation," she said softly. "Because every piece, no matter how worn or discarded, has a place, a story, a value." Julian stood, pulling her into his arms. "You're incredible." She laughed gently, resting her forehead against his. "No, I'm just done hiding." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's strength, the world beyond their walls shifted. People began to see not just the scandal, but the story. Not just the humiliation, but the resilience. And somewhere, miles away, in a suite that now felt like a prison, Vivien scrolled through the endless posts, the brutal truths laid bare. Her name, once adored, now synonymous with cruelty. Her brand collapsing, her influence evaporating. She picked up her phone, fingers hovering over Hannah's number. But she didn't press it. She couldn't. Some bridges once burned could never be crossed again. Vivien looked out at the sea, once so full of promise, now reflecting a future she no longer controlled. And for the first time she wondered what it would have been like to be truly kind, to have been a friend, not a queen, to have chosen love over power. But it was too late. Hannah had already sewn her life into something unbreakable. And Vivien? She was left with the unraveling threads. Section 4. The Rise of the Quilt Foundation. The days that followed were a whirlwind. News outlets from around the world clamored for interviews, desperate to hear from the woman who had become an icon overnight. But Hannah Voss remained silent, letting her actions speak instead. She didn't need the spotlight. She didn't need the sympathy. What she needed, what she wanted, was change. The Quilt Foundation was born quietly, almost humbly, just as Hannah had always lived. But its mission was bold, to provide support, mentorship, and funding to women who had been overlooked, ridiculed, or dismissed. Women whose strength had been buried under judgment, poverty, or the weight of societal expectations. Hannah poured herself into it, spending long hours reviewing proposals, meeting with women from all walks of life, listening to stories that mirrored her own in 1,000 different ways. Julian watched her with a kind of awe he never voiced aloud. He had always known her power, her quiet resilience, but now the world saw it too. Investors, leaders, even former skeptics reached out, offering support, seeking to align themselves with her cause, not for show, but because they believed. Because Hannah had become more than just a name in a scandal. She was a symbol of grace under fire, of authenticity in a world obsessed with pretense. One evening, as the sun dipped below the cliffs, casting golden light across their estate, Julian found her in the garden, a notebook open on her lap. The soft rustle of lavender filled the air, and she looked up, smiling as he approached. "How's it going?" he asked, sitting beside her on the stone bench. She closed the notebook, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "Better than I expected. We've already approved funding for 5 women, one starting a community center in Detroit, another's launching a line of sustainable clothing in Austin. They're incredible, Julian, brave. They just needed someone to see them." He reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "And now they have you." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the weight of the world momentarily forgotten. "Do you ever think maybe this is what all of it was for? The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, to lead us here?" Julian nodded, his voice soft. "Sometimes the hardest roads take us exactly where we need to be." A gentle breeze stirred, and for a moment, everything felt right. But not everyone had found peace. Far away, in a high-rise apartment stripped of its grandeur, Vivien LeBlanc sat alone, staring at the remnants of her life. The brands had left, the sponsors had vanished, her followers, once numbering in the millions, had abandoned her, their adoration turning to scorn. She had become a cautionary tale, her name whispered with disdain. She had tried to apologize, to issue a statement, but the world wasn't interested in her words anymore. They wanted authenticity, and she had none to give. Her reflection mocked her, flawless yet hollow. She picked up the quilt, the one Hannah had made, now resting on the edge of her couch. She had kept it, though she didn't know why. Maybe because it was the only real thing she had touched in years. Her fingers traced the stitches, and for the first time, she wondered what would have happened if she had accepted it that day. If she had chosen kindness over cruelty. If she had let herself be vulnerable instead of wearing the mask of superiority that had now become her prison. Vivien closed her eyes, clutching the quilt to her chest. She wasn't ready to change. Not yet. But something inside her, small, fragile, had begun to stir. Back at the estate, Hannah and Julian sat by the fire. The world outside still buzzing, still reacting, still learning. But for them, the noise faded into something distant, something unimportant. "You've done something incredible," Julian said, watching the flames flicker in her eyes. "We've done it," she corrected, her smile soft. "I couldn't have done this without you." He pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "I'm just the man who got lucky enough to walk beside you." And as the night deepened, and the stars scattered across the sky like tiny stitches in the fabric of the universe, Hannah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Whole. Because in a world that had tried to measure her by the wrong things, she had shown them the truth, that real worth isn't warrant, it's lived. That love isn't loud, it's steadfast. And that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who don't need to prove anything at all. The Quilt Foundation would go on to change thousands of lives. Vivien LeBlanc would fade, but maybe, one day, find her own thread of redemption. And Hannah Voss? And she would remain quiet, strong, unbreakable. A woman who was never meant to blend in, but to stand out exactly as she was. Section 5. The Letter She Never Sent. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the air feels heavy with something unsaid. Hannah stood by the large window in her study, the ocean below restless, waves crashing against the rocks like a distant echo of all that had passed. She sipped her tea slowly, her eyes scanning the horizon, lost in thought. On her desk, beneath a small stack of papers about the Quilt Foundation's next projects, sat an old wooden box, the edges worn, the latch slightly rusted. She hadn't opened it in years. Julian stepped into the room, his footsteps soft, but she didn't turn. "You've been quiet today," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I found something," she replied, her voice distant, almost hesitant. "Something I thought I'd forgotten about." She reached for the box and opened it, revealing a collection of old letters, faded photographs, and small keepsakes from a life long before the wealth, before the headlines. She pulled out a single envelope, yellowed with age, the handwriting delicate and unmistakably hers. "A letter to Vivien," she explained, holding it carefully. "I wrote it the night before her engagement party, years ago. Before any of this, before I knew what she was capable of." Julian's brow furrowed. "You never sent it?" She shook her head. "I wanted to. I meant every word. But I guess I was afraid. Or maybe I already knew it wouldn't change anything." He nodded, understanding, but said nothing. This was hers to face. Hannah sat down at the desk, the letter in her hands, and slowly unfolded it. The ink had faded, but the words still held the weight of her heart. "Dear Vivien, I'm writing this because I miss you. Not the girl you've become, but the one I used to know. The girl who stayed up late talking about dreams bigger than the world, who laughed without caring who was watching, who believed in kindness more than appearances. I see you now, climbing so fast, chasing something I can't understand, and I wonder, do you remember me? Do you remember us? I want to be proud of you. I want to stand beside you and cheer you on, like I always have. But lately I feel like I'm standing on the outside of your life, watching a stranger wear your smile. I'm not writing to pull you back. I just want you to know, I'll always be here. If you ever want to remember who you are, who we were, I'll be waiting. Love, Hannah." Tears welled in her eyes as she finished reading. So much had changed. That offer, that door, it was closed now. Some friendships, no matter how deeply rooted, couldn't survive the storms of pride and betrayal. Julian knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. "Do you regret not sending it?" She thought for a long moment. No, I regret that it wouldn't have made a difference, that she didn't want to remember who she was. He kissed her hand gently. And you? Do you know who you are now? She smiled, the kind of smile that comes from scars healed, from lessons learned. I do, and I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Hannah walked through the garden, the letter tucked back into its box, now resting on a shelf among other relics of her journey. She paused beneath the old olive tree, its branches heavy with fruit, its roots deep and steady. The Quilt Foundation had just funded its 10th project, a women's cooperative in New Mexico, led by a single mother who reminded Hannah of herself in so many ways. The impact was spreading, like ripples on the water, touching lives far beyond what she had imagined. And yet, as much as she was building, as much as she was healing, a part of her still held space for the pain. Not to dwell in it, but to remember, because it was the pain that had shaped her, that had forged the quiet strength she now carried with grace. Meanwhile, in a small cafe far from the grand palaces and ballrooms of the rich, Vivien sat alone, her face hidden behind dark glasses, a scarf pulled tight around her neck. She scrolled through her phone, stopping on an image. Hannah, standing with a group of women, smiling, radiant, alive. She set the phone down, her coffee untouched. From her purse, she pulled out the quilt, folded neatly, still smelling faintly of lavender. She ran her fingers over the stitches, eyes closing. For the first time, the weight of her choices pressed so heavily, she couldn't breathe. She had everything, once. Now she had nothing but this. And a question she couldn't escape. Who would she have been if she'd chosen differently? But no answer came. Only the soft hum of a world that had moved on. Back at the estate, Julian joined Hannah in the garden, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "The sky's beautiful tonight," he murmured. She leaned into him, eyes on the horizon. "It is, and tomorrow will be, too." Because for Hannah, every tomorrow was a chance to live. Not in the shadow of what was lost, but in the light of what had been found. Section 6. A visit from the past. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that fateful wedding still found their way into conversations, media, and whispered apologies from those too late to matter. Yet, for Hannah, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. The Quilt Foundation flourished not as a spectacle, but as a quiet force of change, stitched together by stories of perseverance and hope. Her days were filled with meaning, her nights with Julian, calm. But one morning, as the sky was still painted in soft hues of dawn, a knock at the estate's gate disturbed the stillness. Unscheduled visitors were rare enough to make Hannah's heart skip. Julian was already at the front door by the time she reached the foyer, his eyes narrowing as their head of security handed him a card. "Pages alone," the guard said quietly. "No media, no entourage." Julian glanced at the name on the card, then at Hannah. His voice was measured, but laced with tension. "It's Vivien." For a moment, Hannah didn't move. The name settled into the room like dust, unwanted, heavy. She hadn't thought of her in days. Not consciously. Vivien had become part of her past, the kind of past you learn from, but do not chase. Julian's eyes met hers. "You don't have to see her." But she did. Because some things, even when broken, needed to be faced. The garden was quiet when Hannah stepped out, the morning light catching on the dewdrops clinging to the leaves. Vivien stood near the olive tree, the same one under which Hannah had found so much peace. She looked different, smaller somehow, her usual glow dimmed by the weight of what she had endured. No makeup, no designer labels, just a simple black coat and a scarf, as if trying to disappear into the earth itself. "Hannah," Vivien said softly, her voice almost trembling. "Vivien," Hannah replied, standing a few steps away, her arms folded, not in defense, but in distance. There was a long pause, filled with everything neither of them knew how to say. "I don't deserve to be here," Vivien began, eyes cast downward. "I know that." Hannah nodded slowly. "Why did you come?" Vivien swallowed hard. "Because I needed you to hear it from me. The apology, the truth." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I found this after the wedding. I don't know why I kept it, but I did. I read it and it broke me. Anna's breath caught as she recognized the envelope. The very one she had read weeks ago, the letter she never sent. Vivien held it out, her hand shaking. I saw who I used to be, in your words, and who I became. Hannah took the letter gently, folding it without reading. She didn't need to. That girl is gone, Vivien. Tears filled Vivien's eyes. I know, but I want to try, to find her again. Hannah's gaze softened, but her heart was guarded. Not for me, not for anyone else, only for yourself. Vivien nodded, wiping her eyes. I've lost everything, my name, my work, myself. But seeing what you've built, what you've become, it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, it's not too late. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but honest. I don't hate you, Vivien, Hannah said finally, but I can't forget what happened. Forgiveness? It's not something I can give you right now. I understand, Vivien whispered. But I do hope you find your way, Hannah added, her voice steady, because the world doesn't need more queens. It needs more women willing to stand in truth. Vivien nodded slowly, turning to leave, but before she stepped away, she paused. The quilt? I kept it. Hannah looked at her, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. It's the only thing that's felt real in months, Vivien said. Thank you for not hating me. As Vivien walked away, disappearing down the path, Hannah stood still, the letter in her hand, the garden bathed in the soft glow of forgiveness not yet given, but perhaps, one day, possible. Later, as the sun reached higher, Julian joined her again in the garden. How do you feel? He asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. Lighter, she admitted. Sad, but lighter. They walked together, the breeze warm, the world alive with new beginnings. And though Vivien had left, something stayed behind. A sense of closure, not because wounds had healed, but because Hannah had chosen peace over bitterness. In the days to come, the Quilt Foundation received an anonymous donation, a sizable sum, with a note attached. For the women who still believe in second chances. VL. Hannah smiled faintly as she read it, folding the note gently. Because even broken threads, when treated with care, could still be woven into something beautiful. And her story was far from over. Session 7. A second chance for more than one. The sky over Provence was streaked with soft pinks and oranges as dusk settled over the hills. The scent of lavender drifted through the open windows of the estate, mingling with the quiet hum of life returning to a gentle rhythm. Hannah stood in the doorway of the Quilt Foundation's newly built community center, watching as a group of women laughed, shared stories, and stitched together not just fabric, but fragments of lives. Each woman here had faced her own battle, poverty, abandonment, ridicule, and now they were creating something beautiful, something lasting, with their own hands. It wasn't just quilts they were sewing, it was dignity, purpose, and hope. Hannah smiled, pride swelling softly in her chest. This place, this idea, had grown into something much bigger than she ever imagined. It wasn't just a response to her own story. It had become a movement, one that gave others the courage to reclaim their worth. Julian appeared beside her, slipping his hand into hers. They're thriving, he said, his voice low, his eyes on the women inside. They are, Hannah agreed, leaning into him, and so am I. He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You've given them something no amount of money could buy. You gave them... She looked up at him, her eyes shining. I just wanted to be who I needed when I was them. Julian's heart clenched with admiration, as it often did when he looked at her, when he realized again and again how extraordinary she was, not because of power, not because of wealth, but because of how she chose to use it. They stood there for a moment, wrapped in quiet gratitude, when a familiar figure approached the gate. Lucas. Hannah straightened, her expression softening with surprise. Julian gave her hand a reassuring squeeze before stepping back, giving them space. Lucas looked different now, more grounded, his boyish charm tempered by something deeper. He carried a small box, and his eyes held a mixture of humility and hope. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the path that led to the garden. Hannah nodded, walking with him in silence until they reached the old olive tree, the same place where so much had started and ended. Lucas turned to her, his voice tentative. "I've been trying to find the right way to thank you, but words, they fall short." She smiled gently. "Sometimes, just showing up is enough." He opened the box in his hands, revealing a delicate necklace, a simple gold chain with a small, intricately crafted charm in the shape of a quilt square. "I had it made," he said, offering it to her. "To honor what you've built, what you stand for. I've dissolved my company. I realized I built it on a foundation that wasn't mine. That loan you gave me, that belief, I used it to build something, but I forgot why. I forgot who I was doing it for." Hannah took the necklace, touched by the gesture, by the sincerity in his eyes. "What will you do now?" "I'm joining you," he said, a quiet conviction in his voice. "If you'll let me, I want to invest in the foundation. I want to help women who were like me, lost, trying to find their way." She studied him, her heart soft. He had changed not because he'd been forced, but because he'd chosen to see the truth. "I'd like that," she said finally. "We need more hands, more hearts. You're welcome here." Relief and gratitude washed over his face, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. As they walked back toward the center, Julian met them halfway, shaking Lucas's hand, a quiet understanding passing between the two men. No need for words, just respect. The days turned to weeks, and soon the Quilt Foundation opened a second center and then a third. Stories of transformation poured in, women rebuilding their lives, communities strengthened, hope spreading like sunlight through cracks once thought permanent. Hannah wore the necklace Lucas gave her every day, a symbol not of wealth but of resilience, of second chances not just for others, but for herself. One evening, as the golden light faded into twilight, she and Julian sat on the terrace, watching the sea in its endless rhythm. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what life would have been if none of this happened? If I had never gone to that wedding?" Julian turned to her, his eyes filled with quiet certainty. "It doesn't matter, because this life, this one we're living now, is the one we were meant for." She smiled, leaning into him, the quilt of her life now stitched with pain, love, and purpose. And as the stars began to shimmer above, Hannah knew that the woman she had become was stronger, not despite what she had endured, but because of it. The world had once tried to break her. Now she was helping it heal. Section 8. The woman she was meant to be. Autumn arrived gently in Provence, brushing the hills with golden hues and a crispness that made the world feel alive in a quieter, more reflective way. Hannah stood on the veranda, the quilt draped loosely over her shoulders, gazing out at the vineyard that stretched beyond their estate. Rows of vines, ripe with promise, swayed softly in the wind, a reminder of how growth takes time, patience, and faith. The Quilt Foundation's latest initiative had just launched, a mentorship program pairing successful women with those just beginning their journeys. Hannah had poured her heart into it, believing deeply in the power of shared experience, of one voice lifting another. It wasn't just about funding anymore, it was about connection, healing, strength. Behind her, the house buzzed softly with life. Julian was on a call with their team, Clara was finalizing plans for a retreat with women leaders from around the world, and Lucas was exactly where he needed to be, finally living for something greater than himself. But Hannah needed a moment of stillness. She stepped barefoot onto the stone path leading through the olive grove, each step grounding her, each breath filling her with a sense of gratitude she hadn't known she'd needed. The past, with all its wounds and betrayals, felt distant now. Not erased, but transformed. She paused beneath the oldest tree, its branches heavy with age and wisdom, and ran her fingers along the bark. It was here that she had found her truth, faced her pain, and let go of the weight others had tried to place on her shoulders. And now, standing here, she felt only light. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the hills, Julian found her in the library, curled up with a book she had read a dozen times. He watched her for a moment, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating her face, her hair loose, her expression content. "You disappeared," he said with a smile, settling beside her. "Just needed some quiet," she replied, setting the book down. "The world's loud enough." He nodded, wrapping an arm around her. "Do you ever miss it, the way things were before all this?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I miss believing in people the way I used to, but I wouldn't trade what I know now for anything." Julian kissed her temple, his voice low. "You've changed, you know." And she looked at him, curious. "Have I?" "In all the right ways," he said. "Stronger, more certain, more yourself." She smiled, leaning into him. "I think I finally stopped waiting for the world to define me. I chose who I wanted to be, and I've never felt more free." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two souls have weathered storms together and come out not just intact, but whole. A week later, Hannah stood before a crowd, not in a ballroom, not under chandeliers, but in a sunlit hall filled with women from all walks of life. The first Quilt Foundation retreat was underway, and she had been asked to speak, not as a billionaire's wife, not as a victim of scandal, but as herself. She stepped up to the podium, the room quiet, expectant. "I'm not here to tell you how to succeed," she began, her voice calm, clear. "I'm here to tell you that you already have everything you need. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone, not with titles or wealth or beauty. Your worth was never in question. It's in how you love, how you rise after falling, how you stand even when the world tells you to kneel." She paused, letting the truth settle. "I was once told I didn't belong, that I wasn't enough, and for a while I believed it, but then I realized no one gets to decide that for me, and no one gets to decide it for you." The room stirred, the air electric with recognition, with solidarity. "We are not the clothes we wear, the names we're called, or the rooms we're allowed into. We are the choices we make, the kindness we give, the strength we hold." Applause erupted, but Hannah simply smiled, stepping back, her heart full. She didn't need the noise, the praise. She needed only this, to know she had become the woman she was always meant to be. That night, under a sky ablaze with stars, Hannah and Julian sat together, the quiet hum of the retreat in the distance, laughter and voices blending into something soft and sweet. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her skin. "You changed lives today." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "So did you, just by believing in me." They sat in silence, no more words needed, the world spinning on, full of possibility. And somewhere, far away, Vivien scrolled through her phone, pausing on a video of Hannah's speech. She watched, tears slipping down her cheeks, not out of regret, but out of a strange, aching hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could still find her way. But for Hannah, the path was clear. She would keep walking, keep giving, keep loving. Because the woman they had tried to break was gone. And in her place stood someone far stronger. Someone unbreakable. Section 9. The wedding that was never hers. It was a quiet, unexpected invitation, tucked inside a white linen envelope, hand-delivered with no fanfare, no headlines, just a name written in clean, deliberate script. Vivien Elise LeBlanc. Inside, a single sentence. "If we are ever to be whole, we must return to where we shattered." There was no sender, no return address. But Hannah knew exactly who it came from. She stared at it for a long while, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper as the past rustled like wind through old leaves. It had been nearly a year since that day, since the chandeliers, the champagne, the laughter turned knives. Vivien had vanished from the public eye in the aftermath. Her brand dissolved, partnerships collapsed, her accounts wiped clean like footprints in sand. For a while she had become a ghost, but slowly, silently she had started showing up again, not on screens but in real life, helping at shelters, volunteering at women's workshops, making no announcements, no grand apologies. Just showing up. And now this. The venue was modest, a garden chapel on the edge of the coast, far from the fanfare of the Riviera. The sun hung low, casting soft amber light across the wooden benches and wildflowers that framed the stone archway. There were no photographers, no live streams, just a dozen guests, quiet music, and Hannah arrived just as the music paused. She hadn't told anyone she was coming, not Julian, not Clara, not even herself, until she found her feet carrying her forward. Vivien turned as she approached, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled. Not the polished, peer-perfect smile she used to wear like armor, but a small, unsteady human one. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I almost didn't," Hannah admitted, her voice equally soft. "But then I realized, maybe this was never about you." Vivien nodded slowly, eyes damp. "It was always about what I hated in myself. You just salmoned me the parts I was too afraid to face." They stood there in silence as the breeze played with the lace on the arbor, the past hanging between them like the echo of a song unfinished. "I'm not here to absolve you," Hannah said gently, "or to forget." "I wouldn't ask you to," Vivien replied. "I just wanted to give back what I stole." And then, without flourish, she stepped aside and gestured toward the small altar behind her. And there, placed delicately on a pedestal of reclaimed wood, was the quilt. The same one Vivien had once mocked, the one she had kept hidden, torn once from shame, repaired now with reverence. Only this time, it wasn't just restitution. It was completed. New pieces had been added, soft grays, warm golds, ocean blues, stitched into the original pattern, not covering it, but expanding it, not hiding the scars, but incorporating them. "I didn't want to forget," Vivien said quietly. "I wanted to remember, but differently." Hannah stepped forward, her hands reaching for the edge of the fabric. Her fingers found a line of embroidery near the bottom corner. Not her own work. Vivien's. "I was cruel. She was kind. I learned. Let me become more than the sum of my worst day." Tears gathered in Hannah's throat before she even felt them in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said. "I know," Vivien replied, "because it started with you." Later, after the small ceremony, Vivien's private vow renewal to herself, not a groom, Hannah walked along the cliffs behind the chapel, the quilt folded over her arm. The waves below thundered in gentle rhythm, as if applauding the closure that had finally arrived. Julian was waiting for her at the edge of the trail, his silhouette outlined against the dying sun. "I thought you might come here," he said. She smiled, a little surprised, but not really. "You always know." He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "How was it?" She unfolded the quilt between them, letting him see the new colors, the restored seams. "It was sealing," she said. "Not perfect, not easy, but real." He took her hand and looked out at the sea with her. "So, what happens now?" Hannah looked down at the quilt, then at the horizon. "Now? We keep going, we keep building, and we remember." Julian smiled softly. "And what about her?" "She's on her own path now," Hannah said. "Not mine, but I hope, wherever it takes her, she keeps choosing grace." They stood there as the last light dipped below the waves, the quilt between them like a flag of something far greater than forgiveness. Understanding. Not every story ended with revenge. Not every scar faded. But sometimes, if you were brave enough to return to the place where everything broke, and to find something still standing, something worth beginning again. In Section 10, The Life They Chose. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains of their bedroom, warm and golden as Hannah stirred beneath the covers. The weight beside her was familiar, comforting. Julian, still asleep, his hand resting gently on hers. The world outside continued its endless hum, but within these walls there was only peace. It had been over a year since that day at the Palais de Lumière, since the laughter had turned to silence, since judgment had turned to revelation. And now, here they were, not in the spotlight, not in the center of any storm, but in the quiet aftermath where real life begins. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake him, and pulled on a robe, padding barefoot through the house. The halls were filled with light and life. Photographs of the women they had helped, of retreats filled with laughter and tears, of places they had visited together. Each frame was a reminder that they had chosen this life, not for power, not for recognition, but for truth. In the kitchen, Clara was already at the table, tablet in hand, sipping her coffee with that familiar look of quiet efficiency. She looked up and smiled. "Morning," Clara greeted. "There's something you need to see." Hannah raised a brow, pouring herself a cup of tea, and joined her. On the screen was an article, but it wasn't about them. It was about Vivien. Boomer influencer launches art program for at-risk youth in Paris. Below the headline was a photo of Vivien standing in a small studio, surrounded by children holding brushes and canvases. Her hair was pulled back, her face free of the gloss and polish she once wore like armor. She looked real. "She's trying," Clara said, watching Hannah closely. Hannah nodded slowly, her heart tugging in a way she hadn't expected. "I think she's finally found her own way." There was no bitterness in her voice, no doubt, just a quiet respect for the woman Vivien was becoming. Julian appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his smile soft when he saw them. "Already plotting to change the world without me?" Hannah laughed, standing to greet him. "Always." He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "So, what's next?" She leaned into him, her eyes shining. "A new project, something big, something lasting." They had been talking about it for months now, building a permanent space, a home for the Quilt Foundation, where women from around the world could come, stay, learn, and grow. Not just a center, but a sanctuary. Julian nodded, his eyes meeting Clara's. "Let's do it." Months later, the Hannah Voss Center for Women opened its doors. Nestled in the heart of the countryside, it was a place of light, of healing, of purpose. Stone walls, wide windows, gardens filled with color and life. Every inch of it reflected the journey that had brought them here. From the humiliation of a wedding meant to break her, to the triumph of a life rebuilt on her own terms. Women came from everywhere, drawn not by fame, but by hope. They brought their stories, their wounds, their dreams. And Hannah was there, not as a figurehead, but as a guide. She walked the halls with them, sat in the workshops, stitched beside them in the evenings under the soft glow of lanterns. And sometimes, when the nights were quiet, she would sit by the fire, the quilt, the original, now fully restored, draped over her lap, her fingers tracing the threads like old memories. One night, as autumn leaves danced outside the windows, Julian joined her by the fire. He watched her in silence for a moment, then spoke softly. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. She looked at him, her eyes reflective. "Not the way I used to." "Regrets?" he asked. She shook her head. "Only that I waited so long to believe in myself." He reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "You've given so much, Hannah. You've changed lives." She smiled, her heart full. "So have you, just by loving me." He leaned in, kissing her forehead. "Always." And so their life unfolded, not in grand moments of glory, but in the quiet, steady hum of meaning. They traveled, they built, they loved. The world continued to spin, stories rose and fell, but theirs remained, stitched together not by the things they had lost, but by everything they had chosen to become. Vivien's art program flourished. Lucas went on to mentor young entrepreneurs, never forgetting the lesson he had learned in that glittering ballroom. And Hannah? She stayed true. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about living, about choosing love over fear, grace over pride, truth over appearances. And every morning, when she opened her eyes beside the man who had stood by her through it all, she knew. Storm shelter where she belonged, what it really means to stay. The story of Hannah Voss is not one of revenge. It is one of grace. It is about how strength is not always loud, and power is not always in what the world can see. True power lies in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the kindness we show when it's hardest, and in standing tall in a world that wants to shrink you. Hannah could have walked away from that wedding, from the humiliation, from the people who tried to reduce her to nothing, but she didn't. She stayed not to fight back with anger, but to stand in her truth. She stayed because she knew her worth wasn't defined by the dresses she wore or the rooms she was allowed in, but by the love she gave, the life she lived, and the hearts she touched. And in staying, she didn't just reclaim her dignity, she inspired a movement. This story reminds us that life isn't about how others see us, it's about how we see ourselves. You can lose everything and still have more than those who mock you. You can be cast out and still rise higher than those who pushed you down. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where the world tried to define you, but you chose to stay true to yourself? Share your story in the comments. We're listening. If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength we all carry. Because in the end, the most beautiful quilt is not the one without flaws, but the one stitched together from every piece of who we are.
Thank you for watching today's Billionaire Love Stories. Every love story is a journey, filled with passion, heartbreak, sacrifice, and life-changing moments. Here at Billionaire Love Stories, we bring you the most unforgettable tales of love, power, and destiny, where hearts defy expectations and find their true match against all odds. If this story touched your heart, don't forget, like to support more incredible billionaire romances. Comment your thoughts. Can love truly overcome power and ambition? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next gripping love story. Billionaire Love Stories. Because love isn't about riches. It's about fate. Because love isn't about money. It's about the heart. See you in the next story.